Hello, and welcome to another Half Pint session. And today I have joining me at the virtual Eagle and Child Bar, Dr. Derek Shuurman, who has put together something rather special. Dr. Shuurman, welcome to Pints with Jack.
Thanks for inviting me.
So you came on my radar because I heard that somebody had built a C.S. Lewis bot. So we're going to talk about that in a moment, but let's just do a little bit of background first of all. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and your history with C.S. Lewis?
Yeah, so I grew up in a Christian home and I was always sort of interested in tech. I was a teenager in this sort of early personal computer revolution, the era of sort of the PCs that sort of emerged in the 1980s and just became fascinated with computing and went on to study engineering, worked in industry for a while, and after that got a little bit of a nudge, a calling, if you will, to enter teaching. And so I went back to school and did a PhD in engineering in the area of robotics and computer vision using machine learning. And this was 20 years ago, and have been teaching computer science in Christian colleges. And of course, part of the mission of a Christian college is to also integrate faith and learning, including computer science. And so C.S. Lewis, I think, has been a great cultural thinker and resource, and he's influenced some of my writings along the way. And I found in him some really really helpful resources for thinking through some of the aspects of connecting faith and technology. Um, I don't know whether this is too personal, but I also more recently lost my wife last year, and I found C.S. Lewis's Reflections in a Grief Observed also very, very moving and helpful. But in terms of technology, his books the classic one is The Abolition of Man, and novels like That Hideous Strength have been, and even the Screw Tape Letters have been wonderful, I think, helpful resources for people thinking about technology and culture and so on. So that's my basic background. And right now I'm currently professor of computer science at Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, let me just demo what you've produced and then we'll talk about it. So here is your website, and this is the C.S. Lewis bot. So we can ask C.S. Lewis any question. So one that we regularly argue about on this podcast is, what is my best book? Because Matt and I, like all right-thinking people, say it's The Great Divorce. Andrew says it's Till We Have Faces, simply because C.S. Lewis thought it was his best book as well. Well, maybe not simply because, but he often quotes it. But when we ask robot C.S. Lewis, what is your best book? He responds, the question of the best book is a subjective one, isn't it? I disagree. It's absolutely objective, and it's The Great Divorce. But anyway, he says, as an author, I have poured my heart and my soul into each work, and they all hold a special place for me. However, if I was to choose one that might have significant impact, I might point to Mere Christianity. And then he goes on to talk about the importance of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and how that was a series that he was able to communicate Christian truths to a wider audience. So let's try another one. What happened?
I had no clue, by the way, what that response would be. I'm to be transparent. I'm using a Chat GPT API, so there's a back end where I'm actually using OpenAI's large language model, and then I sort of cobbled this in front of it. But that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. It's an interesting one that it pulled out.
Yes.
The more popular books, rather than the ones that people argue are typically the best. Everyone loves Mere Christianity and the Chronicles of Narnia, but people usually peg their allegiance to one of his other books.
Yes.
So I've now just asked what happened between Lewis and Mrs. Moore, because it's one that was shrouded in mystery, and there was lots of supposition and guesswork as to whether or not they had romantic encounters earlier in their relationship and before his conversion. And once again, he goes, Mrs. Moore, the subject of much speculation, isn't it? And then he goes through and explains their relationship. And he talks about looking after her in the last stages of her life.
Mm-hmm.
So Jack is being he's being a little coy here and not answering my question directly. He's
Mm-hmm.
trying to play his cards close to his chest. Let's do one more. How many books have you written? Because that's often one of the opening lines to most biographical information about Lewis, and that number
Yeah.
varies quite considerably. And here he says more than 30 books, which is probably a pretty good answer because so
Okay.
many of his letters and essays get repackaged
Yes.
repeatedly. But anyway, so that's your C.S. Lewis bot that you produced. And I'd like you to try and explain how does all of this work? And pretend that I am my mother because she's pretty sure I've shown her ChatGPT, and I think she thinks that it's magic. How can computers respond in this way, first of all, and then we'll talk about how you made it adopt the persona of C.S. Lewis.
Yeah. So, things like ChatGPT have been enabled by, two things, like advances in computing power and and algorithms, I would say as well, but also just the vast trove of data that's now available, namely the web. And so companies that build large language models are in the business of basically hoovering up large amounts of data from all over the place. And there's some ethical issues with that too, but that's another issue. And then grabbing this huge treasure trove of data, they're able to um, teach a machine about how to predict or how to be unsurprised about what the next word is in a word sequence given its context. So basically, chatbots and things like ChatGPT have no real understanding, but what they are is just because of the amount of examples of human texts and human interactions that they've been able to collect, that given a certain context of previous words, they're able to predict with quite a reasonable plausibility what the next word ought to be. So, for instance, in a simple phrase like "Mary had a little," that the most probable next word is likely something like "lamb." And
Mm-hmm.
given larger chunks of text and with the sort of corpus that they're working with, they can actually begin to put together sequences of words that just get sort of built into phrases that are just plausible next words within the context of a larger sentence or prompt.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, that's all they're doing. It's a big statistical. Some have called it a big statistical parrot because it's just basically taking existing text and mimicking it in a plausibly statistical way. And if you think about, things like C.S. Lewis or other topics that you might ask a chatbot about, there is a large corpus of information about many of those things on the web. And so the machine, in being trained on this large corpus of words, would have included information from primary and secondary sources, words and information about, in this case, C.S. Lewis or any other topic that you might pose. Um, so what I've done is I've taken one of those large language models or LLMs that they're called, and I've used a programmer's interface to sort of query this large language model, and I've sort of crafted prompts and written just sort of a web front end that basically asks the large language model to take on the persona of C.S. Lewis and then to answer, using that persona based on whatever data it has on C.S. Lewis, primary, secondary, whatever sources. Now, I must add that one of the enhancements that I've always been wanting to do with C.S. Lewis and with some other chatbots I've been working on is by using something called retrieval augmented uh, generation, something called RAG, RAG, where you can actually take a large language model, but then also, look specifically at some local text. And so I would love to have, for instance, the complete text files of all of C.S. Lewis's writings. And then what I could do is add that to my large language model prompt and then actually create even better responses than a sort of standard large language model could on its own. But I don't have copyright permission or access to all of C.S. Lewis's corpus in a convenient way like that. But there are additional things you can do to nudge a large language model to be even more directed towards a specific topic or author or what have you. So what you were looking at, what you were demoing there, was just a web front end that basically packages up these prompts and sends it off to a large language model, and then shows the reply within the same web page.
And the answers that you get are very much driven by what that large language model has been trained on. So if it had been trained, for example, on all of the articles that Andrew has written about Till We Have Faces being Lewis's best book, and Lewis's letters where he says it's far and away my best book, then the C.S. Lewis bot would be more inclined to give that answer.
Yes, and so that's part of this RAG or RAG, retrieval augmented generation, where you can actually add sort of additional resources that can then hone in the kinds of responses that you want. And models have a bias. So, I mean, the model that I'm using has been created. In this case, we're using one by OpenAI, but these models have been, first of all, biased by the information that they've garnered on the larger internet and on the web or wherever they've gotten their data from. But it's also biased by a secondary tuning phase. So companies that sort of build large language models use something called reinforcement learning with human feedback, where you try to, well, in the case of the web, you've got a lot of nasty stuff there that you need to tamp down so that the models don't start generating, really offensive content. So there's actually this phase in a large language model where you basically need a whole bunch of people to start nudging and poking this large language model, and then basically tamping down its more objectionable responses. But in doing that, there are values involved, and so these models have a worldview is sort of embedded in them, and have a certain bias, and so the responses will also reflect those sorts of tuning phases as well.
And I think the other thing that's really worth emphasizing with this and all of these sorts of models, just to reiterate, it doesn't understand really what it's doing.
Yeah.
And its main goal is just to make you happy, and it will say what it needs to say to make that happen.
Yeah. The end goal is just to put together plausible words that sort of snap together into something that's plausible, statistically speaking. And so yeah, even if you could create a large language model that was quite reasonable, that perhaps reflected some of C.S. Lewis's sort of genuine kind of views on certain topics and so on. Large language models, by their very nature, because they're statistical, will sometimes go off into the weeds, because they basically pick the next statistically probable word, and they don't always pick the top probability of the word. There's a little bit of randomness or stochastic nature to it as well, where it'll pick one of the most probable next words, and there's little dials and knobs you can use to adjust, the randomness of those next words and which ones that you're choosing. But it will sometimes veer off into a bizarre direction, and that's referred to as hallucination. So I don't know whether you've observed that with my C.S. Lewis chatbot or not, but it
No.
could go off into the weeds quite easily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, working with ChatGPT directly, I've managed to get it to do things like that a few times, but by and large, I'm usually trying to make it break itself.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
The real strength of these sorts of models, I find, though, is the fact it can summarize an awful lot of information and give you a nice high level overview, so you have a rough idea of a subject, and then you can drill down and ask very particular questions.
Yeah, with the caveat that you could still get hallucinations, or you might be getting biased reports. So you need to be able to sort of sift through any of these replies with kind of some background knowledge and understanding, to be able to realize where the gold and the dross are in the reply. So yeah.
And just to double check some of the things that it tells you, I remember in the very early days of ChatGPT, there were lawyers who were submitting briefs that ChatGPT wrote, and it was just making up cases, non-existent cases, and people didn't check it. I do think that, and there are a few models that are out there at the moment that kind of try and show they're working or explain where you can go to confirm the various facts that it's claiming. Um, do you see things moving in that direction? Where do you see this technology? What's the next step now that we're very good at having it talk to us and seem like it's understanding? What's the next thing?
Yeah, well, I think that the people are basically trying to build better and better models, and yeah, hooking some of the replies to actual sources and being able to cite them. Um, I think that can be really helpful. I think people are just trying to find a myriad of ways to use this technology as assistants and as aids and so on. And the one area that I'm kind of concerned about, I'll put my cards down on the table here too, is and this may sound a little ironic, given the project that I've just shown you, is that I don't like it when these machines pretend to be people, including C.S. Lewis for that matter. I think my sort of Christian ontological understanding of reality is that machines are machines and people are people, and people are not machines. And so to build a machine that pretends to be a person can actually lead to a kind of ontological confusion, right? Having a machine even use the first pronoun I, right, is misleading because it's not an I. There's when it comes to a large language model, there's no there. It's and even something like a home assistant, like a Siri or Alexa or whatever, kind of speaking as it in a human voice, um, and using pronouns like I. It already, I mean, it leads to humans anthropomorphizing a machine,
Mm-hmm.
which I think C.S. Lewis would not be too happy with. I mean, I think
Nor
that
Tolkien.
hideous strength is an example of his view of building machines and how they're not people and so on.
A talking
I think
head.
that yes, yes, talking heads, so to speak. So I think. This was an interesting, fun experiment. It's another reason why I haven't publicly put it out there. I think it's problematic, and I think maybe a better mode might be to have a large language model that could give you information about C.S. Lewis without pretending to be C.S. Lewis. So,
Mm.
a machine that could be a research assistant that could have, especially if you could use this RAG, this retrieval augmented um, generation, where you could actually, you know, have his entire corpus as part of that query, and to be able to find, okay, give me all the books where the theme of whatever it is appears within each of those writings. And so I think that would be a really, really helpful way to use the tool, as opposed to having it try to impersonate a historical figure or a person at all. So yeah.
Yeah, I think the real strength of the system, what I use it chiefly for, is generating a load of text. When I have to write an email that I don't want to have to write, just say, write this email and make it nice, and then it'll spit out a load of text I can at least copy and paste and then edit a little bit just to give it my own touch. But the other real strength is also in summarization, because I do find that to be very good. Although it sometimes does get a little bit confused about boundary markings. So when we were doing a recent episode on The Last Battle, I tried to get ChatGPT to summarize each of the chapters for me, and it got a little bit confused about the chapter boundaries. The summary of the story was great, but it wasn't quite as strict as I needed it to be.
Yeah, yeah, and I think even when it comes to generation, maybe something as ephemeral as an email, that's okay. But if you use ChatGPT to begin writing something, it changes the creative process. So the
Mm-hmm.
very fact that you're using I mean, you end up going down a particular path that the machine has set that may foreclose your own ability to dream up other ways of starting or opening or shaping or structuring an argument or an essay or a letter or an article. And so I think using it to generate text, having it write for us, I think is a less helpful kind of mode of operation. It's a more lazy way to use it, and so I think there's actually we need to think about this, how this tool shapes how we begin to think and how it might close down things. And you have to think as well, this large language model is made by taking existing arguments and thoughts and so on and distilling it into this large language model. So it's harder to get novelty when you're,
Hmm.
I mean, it's a mashup of statistical mashup of stuff that's already there. But you know, when you're writing an article for readers, you want to contribute something new, some new kinds of thoughts and ways of thinking. And so a colleague of mine is actually working with large language models, not to write for you, but to find ways to use them to help you write better, right? So
Mm.
basically, rather than generating text for you, using the model um, while you're composing text to sort of ask you questions. Oh, could you make this point clearer? Or, oh, maybe you could add an example here. You know, sort of like a Grammarly on steroids, right? To kind of help you write better. So
Where my head went was, oh, so it's like Clippy. It looks like you're
yeah,
writing a letter.
hopefully one that's actually helpful. Yes. No, I
Hmm.
think that's a way of loving your neighbor, right? Building tools that help you write and communicate more clearly, more winsomely, more whatever it is, whatever the mode is that you're writing in, or genre that you're writing in, and rather than just doing it for you. And I think this is
Mm.
the challenge in higher education right now. So universities are scrambling. Like, what do we do, right? You can't assign an essay in first year history about why the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman, and basically students are just going to go off and generate that their own through Chat GPT or whatever. So coming up with creative ways and creative sort of writing assignments that cannot be generically answered by a chatbot, and to have students use them sort of in an augmented way to help them write better, but not to write for them. So they're still thinking and they're still
Mm.
learning to articulate ideas and to be able to put down coherent thoughts without short circuiting that process.
I do like that idea of making AI more like a coach than a slave. It's helping you be better rather than you just delegating all of that work. I had some of my friends at work. They said we're using our AI for the wrong things. People keep on trying to get it to write stories and do art. No, go do my laundry, do my washing up. I will do the art. I will tell some stories.
Yes, no, that would be the home run. A famous Christian computer scientist who passed away a couple of years ago. His name is Frederick Brooks, winner of the ACM Turing Award, which is sort of like the Nobel Prize in computer science. He once wrote about AI, and he talked about his prediction is that IA will be better than AI. And this idea of intelligence amplification or intelligence augmentation, working together, people and machines in a hybrid manner, is going to be a far more fruitful way to pursue this rather than just trying to build giant brains, like that hideous strength, for instance. Yes.
I love it. I love it. And if this conversation has surprised people to discover that computer scientists have deeper thoughts on the nature of reality, I would recommend. I think it's the first book of its kind that I ever read. It was by Donald Knuth. It was called "Things Computer Scientists Rarely Talk About." That was a wonderful book, and it was a validation that I could. I didn't actually have to quit my computer science degree and go and do one in philosophy or theology, but that I could bring some of those questions and some of that worldview to my own work.
Yeah. Don Knuth is another Christian computer scientist,
Oh, is that how you
another.
pronounce it? I've only ever seen it
Yeah,
written.
and he is, another one of these ACM Turing Award winners and sort of a highly respected computer scientist. But that book, things that computer scientists rarely talk about, I think opened up some interesting dialogue. He did that lecture. I think it was at MIT, but he also did it in Canada when I was a student there, and when I was associated with the University of Waterloo. I did my undergrad and master's at the University of Waterloo in Canada, and he actually did that talk there. And what was neat is that he had the street cred to kind of bring out everybody who was had anything to do with computer science, but he could talk about God and he was completely welcomed with open arms to do that. He did another interesting book he talked about at the same time, his 316 project, where he actually,
Yeah.
yeah, he sort of, he wrote about every 3 verse 16 in the Bible, chapter 3 verse 16, and had some beautiful calligraphy that was done along with that. And I remember he sort of described the project like this. He goes, well, I was in a Bible study and I was thinking, we can't really read the whole Bible, so what can we do? Well, maybe we can get a stratified statistical sample of the Bible by reading all the chapter 3 verse 16s. And then he wrote this up in his 3 verse 16 book. And it was kind of neat because every 3 verse 16 he had a beautiful reflection and found some really, really deep kind of things to mine in each of those verses. And yeah, it was kind of a neat project, also artistically because of the calligraphy that was involved. So yes, computer scientists are not just eggheads writing code. They think about bigger things too.
I remember the first time I started really wrestling with the doctrine of the Trinity, and at the same time at university we've been doing UML. So I had a go at seeing, can I model the Trinity using UML diagramming in a way that's not heretical? Still not quite sure what the answer to that one was.
Yeah, I think I'd be afraid to tread there, but there's some things that probably can't be modeled. But yeah, I mean, there are helpful analogies sometimes that you can derive.
Oh, and also when I was learning design patterns, when I came across the proxy pattern, so it's sort of like prayer. It's an invocation to a service that's much more powerful than you are. And sometimes you get back a response that you weren't expecting.
Yeah. The problem with the metaphor and analogies is that they also have many shortcomings. But yeah, they're another angle to look at things, perhaps. Yeah, and each discipline has different ones that they can bring to bear. Yeah.
Exactly. Computer scientists have souls too. This has been wonderful. Where can people go to find out more about you? You said that the chatbot isn't publicly available because it costs you money each time anyone runs a query.
Fraction of a penny per query. So yeah, if it goes viral, then I could be in trouble. But yes.
But where can people go to find out more about you and other things that you've been working on?
Yeah, I have a personal website here at Calvin at sites, sites.calvin.edu/Derek, spelled DEREK. So sites.calvin.edu/Derek. And I have two books on faith and technology. One is Shaping a Digital World, and the second one is a Christian Field Guide to Technology for Engineers and Designers, and they're both published by InterVarsity Press Academic. So those are available, and my website has links to talks and other articles and readings and resources if people are interested in the topic of faith and technology, faith and AI, and those sorts of things.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it. I didn't get a pint of beer, but I've got some water I've been nursing here, so that'll have to do.
It often does, but that's okay. And viewers, please join us again next time when we'll continue going further up and further in. Cheers!